Okay, welcome back. This is tape 2. In case you've gotten lost, we're on tape 2. This will be the third side in the series. Right now we're up to March 18th, 1975, and it's Billy's 8th contact with Semjase from the star cluster known as the Pleiades. The interesting topic that happened in that particular meeting, Billy had some questions that he was getting now from his group members. When he would go out for a contact, he would of course come back and tell everybody about what happened, and they would discuss the information because, excuse me, they were all starting to take part in actually helping him get the information together. Billy would type it out very roughly, and then they would clean it up. So already they were forming kind of like a work group to help him out. And along with that, of course, they had a lot of questions of their own, and since they weren't able to go on the contacts with Billy, quite frequently they would give questions to Billy to have him ask Semjase. And she would try to entertain the questions whenever possible. And this brought up a pretty good group of questions on this occasion. And the first one is, Billy jumped right off and says, "What is matter?" Well, she says, matter is a sizable idea. It is a solid form of energy that can be sizable. What she's referring to here is this, that throughout the universe, energy and matter are everywhere, and that you can take energy and you can convert it to matter, and depending on how much you can convert, you could convert it to any sizable amount of matter. All energies can be turned into solid matter. It's only necessary to condense the concerning energy very strongly and concentrate it very highly. Now, of course, they say it's very simple. The process by which you actually do that might be a little difficult, but we do that to some extent already. We convert ethers, gases, and so forth into different things now, and make certain compounds and metals and so forth. So we're working on it. What we do is, once you concentrate a certain energy, you can convert it into a solid matter, and this provides the basic building blocks of solid components. You create the neutron, the proton, and the electron. This forms the atoms of the chemical compounds, which then in their three aggregate forms form the solid outer wrap. And this is something that our scientists, I'm sure, are quite aware of by now. This means that the original energy is absolute matter, and original matter is absolute energy. General idea is that the entire universe is either matter or energy. It's either solid or it's non-solid. Coarse matter is what matter is. Solid matter is what the Pleiadians refer to as coarse matter. Okay? Energy is what they refer to as fine matter. Earlier we talked a little bit about, our spirits, when they leave the body, they go into the fine matter world. Well, the fine matter world is an energy form world. It's not a solid matter or a coarse matter world. Okay? She mentioned that it's possible to create machines which actually convert matter to energy and vice versa. And apparently they understand that concept quite well. A side effect or an outdrawing of that might be the fact that they were able to take Billy into the ship, much like we see on Star Trek, where they would beam him up, somehow where the particles of his body would come apart, be arranged back inside of the ship. So they're having control of converting the solid matter of a person into fine matter and then putting it back into coarse matter. This also is one of the main ways that they actually move their ships around the galaxy, which we'll talk a little bit more about pretty soon. The most natural form of what we're talking about here, converting energy into matter, is done by the creation itself. And here again we find the Pleiadians bringing up this idea of what the creation is. They openly admitted to Billy that they didn't know everything about creation, but through their technology and their association with other races, they were learning a lot more about the actual creative energy that creates the universe and everything in it. So when they refer to the creation, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about the original source of energy that created all things in the universe. Commonly on our planet, we generally refer this to as a god, but they're saying that gods are actually physical forms that are created in the universe by creation, just like everyone else. That gods are actually humans that have on the very highest development of knowledge, and that their knowledge of the elements and the laws of nature and the laws of creation are so high that it seems to us that they are creating things, when mostly they're just manipulating or generating things because of no knowledge. That the real force, the real creative force in the universe is what they're calling a creation. They have discovered that creation naturally on its own creates an idea of spiritual energy. And this is what they believe. They say that the creational force that started this universe, and we'll go much farther, more into depth in this on the tape series at the end, is that the creation has the idea of spiritual energy. The spiritual energy then is converted into different forms of matter, which begin to evolve. And everything throughout the universe then has logical reasoning to it. And the rocks, the planets, the animals, us, everything that is solid, which is coarse matter, has natural logic to it and is part of the mapping, you might say, or the knowledge of the creational energy. So, since everything in the universe is coarse matter and or it is fine matter, they can be converted easily back and forth once the knowledge is known. So, that was her general explanation of what matter actually was. In relationship to his second question, which was, what about the theory of relativity, and especially the dilation of time, because somebody in the group, of course, was familiar with Einstein's theory, E equals mc squared, which stands for energy equals mass times the speed of light square. They were curious as to what Semyosi would say about that, and if there was truth to it, if it was really a valid theory. Well, she says, well, in relationship to actually moving in space and space travel, there are many different ways to overcome space. As a matter of fact, there was way too many for her to expand upon, but she says the one main thing, no matter which method you actually use, you must learn to master what they call hyperspace. Because in hyperspace, this is where a time dilation is caused by the process of moving into hyperspace. She says this is where the theory of relativity is wrong, where it becomes just a theory. Okay? The turning off of a time dilation or time shift is caused by the breaking open of hyperspace. Well, how do you break into hyperspace? Well, here's a little short explanation that can go along with Exhibit 1 on your drawings there of the beam ship. We mentioned earlier that a beam ship can take off, leave Earth, move up to tremendous speeds. It makes a jump, and then it jumps to the Pleiades, returns in the physical form, and slows down. It takes 7 hours. The 7 hours are spent speeding up, slowing down, and the jump is almost instantaneous. Well, the jump is very, very fast. She says what actually happens is when that ship speeds up, it's protected by an energy field around it, because as you move any matter in space, as it begins to move, there is actually mass in space. It's like if you have a boat in water. The faster you go, you feel the force against you, right? Even when you're swimming. Well, in space, which we think of as a vacuum, it actually is not. There is mass in space. And when you speed an object up to 50,000 miles an hour, 100,000 miles an hour, 1,000,000 miles an hour, speed of light is approaching 700 and some million miles an hour, something like that. You're moving at incredible speeds. There is a mass buildup. And that mass will attempt to actually cause the explosion of your craft that you're in, because the mass will keep building. So what they do is they've learned to put energy screens around the ship that protect it from this mass speed correlation. And at the certain point when they get up around the speed of light or beyond it, they can accelerate way beyond it if they want to, they use this tremendous force to facilitate what they call the paralyzation. They turn off the protection screens around it. At that moment, there's a tremendous increase in the velocity of the ship as it bursts forward, and at that exact time, there's a tremendous enlarging of the mass, then, of that energy screen as it's coming in. They use that to facilitate some sort of compression concept, where the ship is then converted to fine matter, and it's a type of fine matter that can exist in hyperspace. So that's exactly what they do. She says that it happens very quickly, the matter gets distorted, and with a millionth of a second, it becomes fine matter, and it's able to pass through hyperspace. Speed is not the only consideration in this. She says you can go way beyond the speed of light and still do it. It's just generally you need to get up approximately at least to the speed of light before there is enough mass generated where this is actually facilitated. It's the mass of an object increases in relation to the growth of its speed. It even happens in airplanes dust when we're traveling. Space travel can be very, very dangerous. As we move forward in our technology, and right now we're blowing rockets out into space at 30,000, 40,000 miles an hour, which is very slow on the scale of things that move throughout the universe. The speed of light is 186,000 miles in 1 second, and we're only going 30,000 miles in an hour. So in an hour's time, light travels a tremendous difference. If it goes 186,000 miles in 1 second, now it takes 60 seconds to make a minute, and then it takes 60 minutes to make an hour. So you're talking, a very large distance that this thing will actually speed of light in 1 hour. So it's tremendously faster than 30,000 miles an hour. It's a very difficult concept, she said, to understand hyperspace and time dilation, because you're moving, when you are in hyperspace, when we break into hyperspace and make this time dilation, you're in what's called null time. It is a non-physical, non-three-dimensional world then where only fine matter exists. One of the real difficulties here is that if there is the slightest variance in the speed of the fine matter particles, there can be a tremendous shift in time. As a matter of fact, they mentioned that just a very slight change in that speed, you could slip millions of years in time and to get totally lost and not be able to find your way back to where you came from. She says there are stories all the time of developing races trying to figure this technology out, and they work on it, and there's a tremendous loss of life and equipment because it's such a difficult thing to actually figure out. She says even here on Earth we've had any number of space travelers who have come here in a variety of sort of time-type machines and gotten stuck, and they can't get away. If a spaceship breaks through the speed of light without going into hyperspace and without protection of these screens, these manufactured screens, there will be a catastrophe for the ship and the crew. A time dilation is only just one of the many dangers that happen, so something we have to look forward to as we get out there. Just to kind of finish up on this note, it may start becoming aware to some of us that even when we move here in our high-speed jets, there's an increase in mass. You're in a common airliner, maybe going 600 miles an hour. You actually are increasing in mass somewhat because of your speed. Now, just to fly in a normal airplane, that's a pretty low speed on the scale of things, so you don't really have to worry too much about any damage to yourself. But if that was done repeatedly, and if you were, for instance, in rockets going 30, 40,000 miles an hour, if you were, on a shuttlecraft going back and forth to the moon all the time at those speeds, eventually it would come into play. She says at the very slow speeds, like in an airplane, it could take hundreds of years for that damage to really, build up. But at the faster speeds, like in the rockets, it could happen maybe within a few years. So what's really happening is as you speed up, mass of your body is actually increasing, and that can have a damaging effect on your mental functions and on the actual functioning apparatus of the brain. So it could cause untold sort of mental damage. Might point out here again that Billy Meier lives on a small farm in a place called Schmidrudi, Switzerland, and because of his loss of his left arm, is very limited in the type of work he can do. And for the past many years, especially during the time of the contacts, most all of his attention has been focused on just amassing the information from the contacts and getting his books out. Because of that, he really has no other income. He gets a small pension amounting to roughly $600 a month in American to live by. And the expenses on the farm are quite high, so the group members all contribute to do that. Well, during these early contacts, Semiosi was always suggesting to Billy that he'd get the books out, and Billy was always having trouble just paying the rent. So he mentioned to her on a few occasions that that he had money problems, and she mentioned that she would supply him with crystals and other stones and so forth that he could sell. Well, to begin with, Billy says, "Oh, I'm not materialistic. I don't want to sell things for money." And then he says that there's a problem with the officials in Switzerland, and he wasn't too sure if that was a good idea. But she, on several occasions, offered and even suggested that they would bring him crystals from different worlds and other stones, precious stones that he could sell, and that there really wouldn't be any problem with officials because there is no difference in the stones, for instance, a crystal from one world over the ones we would find here. That throughout the universe there is logic as to the structure and components of the things that make up a crystal or stone or whatever. So the idea was that a crystal on another world is just like a crystal here, and gold on another planet is just like the gold here, that the structure is pretty much the same. So she wasn't worried about them being able to detect that these stones were from another planet or something like that. Billy could just sell them as regular stones. But, however, he did receive a few crystals from him, but this led to some questions about, do certain precious stones, crystals, metals, and so forth have some sort of healing capabilities? And she said, well, yes, but it's overplayed, that many stones, such as crystals, have the ability to absorb some types of illnesses and pull them into themselves, and it can be beneficial where you can store healing energies and so forth in stones. But this was not to be exaggerated, and they really weren't that effective. She even commented to Billy that it's important that you know how to clean stones, because someone can be wearing a crystal for a period of time, and if they're suffering through some sort of illnesses, either physical, mental, emotional, or whatever, that also can get into the stone, and these stones need to be clear out. So she went through a brief description explaining to Billy how to clean them out and so forth using a pyramid. At the same time, she mentioned to Billy that their technology, of course, is farther advanced than ours, and she gave Billy the designs and plans on how he could build a machine that would cure most illnesses. And she expressed in some detailed explanation how this would go about. It was so clear that Billy even estimated the cost at being around 30,000 Swiss francs to build this machine. I've always wanted to know what the machine was and get the plans. And when I was visiting at Billy's, I asked about this. I says, was the machine ever built? And they told me no. And I says, would it be possible to get these plans? And I was sharply told there that the machine was only for Billy, which is very contradictory to what it says in the contact notes. So as of yet, I still have never seen the plans for this machine, nor do I know really very much about it. But apparently they do exist, and they are blocked out of the contact notes. It just they put some dotted lines in there where she's explaining how this machine works, so we really don't have a clue. But it could be very interesting someday if we could get that information. And here is some actual off-world technology that could be beneficial to man, but it's being held back over there. Billy on several occasions was always asking Semjase if it would be possible for some of the members of his family and his group to come out and actually see the ships. And most of the time, Semjase was always rather emphatic that no, that wouldn't be possible, that they had decided, that the Pleiadians had decided that only Billy would be able to see the ship. They seemed to somehow be able to control matter and energy, and through some sort of distortion system, they call it, they can cause certain people not to see it. For instance, Billy could be standing on the road taking a picture of the ship, and you could be just like 100 meters down the road or 100 yards down the road, and you wouldn't be able to see it. So apparently they can control reflected light. They can control somehow, how the image bounces off the ship, or I have really no idea how they do it, but that is a possibility. I know that several people over in Billy's group who I've talked to that have taken him out on contacts experienced that same frustration. But on one occasion they did say, that they would allow that, and they allowed Billy to bring several members of the family out for a night demonstration where they were all able to bring their cameras and take pictures of the several ships at night, which they did, and there are some very good pictures there. On that particular occasion, Semjase was even very clear to Billy that it would be possible at this point for him to invite outside people, like members of the press, members of other investigative bodies, to come and witness the demonstration. And they told Billy to be very careful about who he invited, that they didn't want to bring really negative people out who would try to make this out as something, contrary or negative. That if there were, people in the media who would report this honestly and clearly, and then they were welcome to invite them. But Billy was to be very careful about who he invited. To my knowledge, he invited certain family members and other friends and witnesses, and a lot of pictures were taken, but I don't know of anybody in the press that was actually invited. During the ending of this contact, Semjase said that she wished to finish some of the history lesson that she had started once before, and so I want to continue that right here and tell you a little bit more about the history of our ancestors and bring it right up to today. Before, when we talked about history, we discussed the fact that the ancient Lyrians had spread themselves throughout the galaxy, seeded many other planets, and spread around, including under the leadership of an Ishwish named Aesol, had moved off and formed what we today think of as the Pleiadian society. That was 230,000 years back. And then down through the centuries, on many occasions, Earth had been populated in small colonies. As a matter of fact, there have been many people from the Pleiades, Lyra, Vega, and Orion on many different occasions who had come here and settled small colonies from time to time. The first really major mass colonization that they are familiar with occurred 50,000 years back when an Ishwish named Pelagon came here. and brought around 70,000 people with him. Among those 70,000 people, there were 200 sub-leaders and scientists, each one a specialist in a certain area of scientific information. They built a very large society. That society covered the entire planet. It was on every continent. There were cities everywhere. That civilization lasted for almost 10,000 years before it ended in a very violent war. Fortunately for them, they had the technology to get off the planet, and most of them fled, the ones that could survive anyway. For 7,000 years, then, there's a period where the Earth is almost totally alone, where there's nothing going on. Now, we're back to 40,000 years ago. They fled and had their war. There's 7,000 years of almost no one being here except the then developing Earth human beings, the Adams and the Evas, that's us. And 33,000 years back then, the descendants of those who had fled that big war, many of them returned. In particular, there was a great leader named Atlant, and he had a wife named Caratide, and they founded the continent that would be called Atlantis. Caratide's father's name was Muras, M-U-R-A-S, and through him they founded a city called Mu, which was located, the central city, in the Gobi Desert. The city of Mu had two underground cities, Agharta I and Agharta II, which had tunnels built between them, and that was the central seat of power for Mu. Mu and Atlantis both had their own colonizations all over the planet and sprung up all over the place. But they lived peacefully for many thousands of years, actually about 18,000 years. And then about that time, certain factions grew up in both of their societies, which were beginning to cause problems and causing one person against another. And after all these years of peace, strife broke out. There were some factions of war beginning. The governments at hand, the Atlantean and the Mu governments, would not stand for this war breaking out, and those who were attempting to cause the wars, they drove them out of town, literally. But in this case, they drove them off the planet. Well, these people left in large amounts. There was an exodus of those warlike people. They left, and I'm told they went to the Barnard Star. Some of the others may have split off and gone to different areas, but that's where the major amount of them went. 2,000 years went by where there was again peace between Atlantis and Mu and the cities of Earth. We're back to about 13,000 years now, back from our time. That's the time frame where we're at. At that point, those people who had left had built up on their own planet, the ones that were exiled. Their race had escalated and become very ruthless and very warlike. They then had a leader named Arus, A-R-U-S. They decided to return to Earth. Eris must have been quite a guy, because it says in their folklore that he was thought of as the barbarous one. He also had a strong following, had a couple hundred leaders behind him, similar to Pelagon, that were very high in the sciences and the arts. They settled in the high north country, it says, and in the area we now call Florida. In these two areas, and proceeded to start small wars again against Atlantis and Mu. One interesting fact, though, if you take the globe of Earth and look at it, and look where Florida is now. Now, if you take your hands and roll it over to where Florida moves up to the north, where Greenland is now, that's the position that the planet was in at that time. So just roll the planet over so Florida moves up farther north and up to that northern area where Greenland now is, and that's the position where things were actually at. That puts the area where Atlantis was, which was the large landmass between South America and Africa, that moves it up farther north, where it's north of the equator then. Okay, more on the line almost with where America is now. So you can see that the planet was in a different position. What happened was war finally eventually did break out, that Eris and his people caused a great war to break out. There was a major war that happened between Atlantis and Mu. And that ended actually in one day. It was such a short war. They had such high technology. Just to give you a brief idea of what happened, on the history tapes that I have, this goes into much larger detail, and there's a much longer explanation of all about the history and these things, but I don't have time for here. So you could listen to that if you're interested in more. But ultimately what happened was the Atlanteans, who had a large number of ships, a very large army of spacers, started an assault against Mu in the morning, and apparently within about 20 minutes' time, with these some sort of dissolving ray energy beams they have, they almost immediately annihilated the city of Mu. Now, the people of Mu were thought of as scientifically being more advanced than Atlanteans, but they didn't have the number of spacers, and apparently they really weren't prepared for the immediate attack. The Atlanteans caught them by surprise and wiped Mu out almost instantly, like I say, within about 20 minutes' time. Unknown to the people of Atlantis, as they were back celebrating and cheering their immediate victory, they had just wiped out millions of their friends. The people of Mu, the scientists of Mu, who had been expecting a war, had taken a large group of their people, flown out into space in the area where the asteroid belt is, and found rather large chunks of the old planet Milano, which is what the debris of the asteroid belt is made up out of. They took one very large asteroid that was floating out there that was several miles in diameter, and they actually, by hooking some sort of engines or ships to that asteroid, propelled it towards Earth. They then propelled this large asteroid and smashed it right into Atlantis. When it hit, it actually didn't hit Atlantis. It exploded when it hit the atmosphere several miles above the land. But when it exploded, it ignited and blew up the atmosphere. It caused the ocean floor to crack open, and that's why Atlantis sunk down to the ocean floor. The air, the atmosphere of Earth was just black smoke and ruin for, I think, something like 40 years. It threw us off our axis and caused the rotation of the planet to actually change. So it was a rather disastrous war and wiped out just about everything. There was hardly any life left on the planet. Eris and his people survived. Most of the people who survived from Atlantis and Mu from the different cities fled to get away from the wars and the evil tyranny of Eris and took off back to the Pleiades, Vega, Barnard Star, or other friendly places. When the dust had settled, so to speak, Eris, an Ishwish who has an expected life expectancy of over 3,000 years, was still alive, along with all of his followers. They had taken Earth. Well, there weren't too many people, though, to rule over. There was the then developing Earth human beings that were left here, and just the people that had followed Eris, and hardly anybody left from Atlantis and Mu, because the destruction was so wide-felt. Well, after a period of time, the sub-leaders of Eris, the scientists, began experimenting on the local Earth human beings, the Adams and the Evas. Through that experimentation, all sorts of diabolical creatures were created that have gone down through the years as myths. They bred humans with fish and all sorts of animals to try to do things. But among these rather diabolical experiments, some were conducted by a scientist, one of the Eris' scientists, named Semyas A, with an A. In the Lyrian and Pleiadian language, if you end a name with A, it's masculine. If you end it with E, it's feminine. Billy's having feminine. Billy's having contacts with Semyas E, and Semyas A would be a man. Actually, the names, these are kind of like code names that they use, and they are, I guess you could call them spirit names. And they use these names to, one, express the level of education that the individual is currently in. And Semyas A or Semyas E is a spirit name that indicates that a person is more like a half-Ishwish, that they've learned about half the knowledge that would be necessary to be a king or a queen of wisdom. That's the general idea. So that's what the name actually meant. So here in Eris's time, we have a scientist named Semyasa that began conducting experiments again on the Earth humans, the Adams. And this is where Adam and Eve actually came from these experiments, that he took a local Earth human woman and coupled her together with in some sort of lab experiment and created Adam. That's where Adam actually came from. He then did the breeding again and created a young lady. Okay, now he had in the lab creation an Adam and an Eve, a man and a woman. And when they grew up, he coupled them together, and that was the formation, or where the story of Adam and Eve actually started from. That's how it actually happened, and that was the beginning of the current race of people here on Earth, that they had been genetically altered through Adam and Eve, and that's how it really got started. You see, after this big destruction and all this war, there weren't very many people really left on the planet. We only really had about 3 tribes left. There was the Indian tribe that we think of here in the Americas. There was the inhabitants around the Black Sea, and there was the race called the Hebrews or the Gypsies at the time. That's about all the people that were left. We had the Sumerian race, which was hiding out over in India, up in the mountains and so forth over there, but those were ETs, and they weren't considered among the developing Earth human races. So we have 3 developing Earth human races which have genetically been started by Semyasa, this scientist from Eris. Eris is very upset that this is happening when he finds out, because frankly he just didn't want his people mixed with the lower forms, the earth people. And at first he was outraged. It's not known exactly what he did to Semyasa, but the many other scientists that were also experimenting with earth people, many of them were killed or exiled or whatever. And apparently he was quite enraged until he discovered that now he had a whole new group of followers, that he not only had reign over his people, but he could also had more followers in the form of 3 groups of earth people who were developing in these 3 areas around the planet. So to them he set himself up as God, the creation, and they became to worship him. He thought so little of them that he demanded sacrifices from them. He was very cruel to them, quite often demonstrated to keep him in line by killing some of them. Now remember, Eris was an Ishwish, a very, very, very powerful man who understood much of the laws of nature. To him, things like telepathy, levitation, and most importantly, the ability to put thoughts in another person's mind was something that he understood. So that would be very scary to developing earth people who had abilities nothing like this. Even on our level of knowledge today, someone like that would be very scary indeed. Well, Eris eventually died. He had a son named Jehav, Jehav, who was just as ruthless as he was and continued his reign of domination and fear, hate, and anger all over the planet. So the planet Earth was not in very good shape. We're going back now, we're about 9,000 years back when Jehav comes into power. Jehav has another son, Jehovah. Jehovah is the one who continued that tradition and actually helped pull all the Hebrews together and told them that they were his chosen people among all the other people on the planet, and instilled this thought of speciality into the Hebrew people through his ability mentally to do that. And this is where the concept started to the people that they were chosen over the other people of the planet. Well, perhaps they were, but at that time I don't think that was any great prize, considering the level of evolution and intelligence that was going on at the planet at that time. I don't think that was much of a prize. But at any rate, that's where the concept started. There were 2 or 3 other leaders after that who were not as vicious, who were not as bloodthirsty as Jehovah, who eventually wanted to return to the Pleiades. Life in the Pleiades had become very peaceful, very comfortable, and very loving. And life on Earth was very distasteful to these older, more evolved beings over a period of time. And eventually, they decided to leave. And it was 1943 years back from the year 1975, which puts us in the year 32, that they decided to leave Earth and return back to the Pleiades. At that time they did. That was kind of the end of the Lyrian Pleiadian leadership on the planet Earth. And for a long period of time, they just did nothing more than just occasionally watch in on us. It wasn't until around the 1600s that the current race of Pleiadians took an interest in us again, because we were starting to develop rapidly. And they began to build bases here on the planet again and actually monitor our civilization and take an interest in it. On several occasions they had open contacts with other people like Billy Meier, and leading up to 1937, when they again decided, because of the acceleration time that we're moving into, this Waterman era, that they again would procreate several spirits, and they did procreate 4. Procreation means to cause them to be born. And on February 3rd, 1937, at 11:20 in the morning, once again the Pleiadians intermingled, you might say, into the society of Earth, and caused Billy and 3 others to be born with a mission in mind to get themselves back involved with Earth people, pass on certain information, mostly spiritual information, to try to help us through this difficult time. You see, the Pleiadian theory is that the New Age, Waterman era, whatever you want to call it, the Golden Age, Age of Revolution, whatever you want to call us coming up, is a very important time. They understand scientifically what is actually happening and explain that to Billy. But they feel it's very important during this time of potential growth and learning, that they try to bring strong people forward, light bearers, light workers, teachers, prophets, and intelligent people forward, educate them so that the Earth has a chance to grow into a peaceful civilization instead of the rather warlike greed power system that currently prevails over our planet. First of all, let me make a couple of things clear, at least clear by the Pleiadians, that they wanted to make it known that the New Age time is not a time of ending. Many religions, beliefs, and different people like to think of this as the end of the world, that this is an ending time, and it's not. It is actually a time of change. It's a time of beginnings, and it's a time of wonderment. It's a chance for opportunity. They told Billy that we have roughly 800 years, they estimate. During the next 800 years will be the massive changeover with the potential to move into a new type of social structure and a new society with a new way of thinking where we would live closer in harmony to creation. If we miss that, if within the next 800 years that we instead fall into barbarism and continue with our greed, war, and power, that we most likely will annihilate ourselves, or someone will do it for us, and we would fall back into, dark times again. That let me explain a little bit more about what this means. The planet Earth is in a solar system. We're taught 9 planets, but there's actually 11, we're told, revolving around a sun. This solar system, then, that we're in is on its own path. It's in a large kind of oval pattern of its own. And every 25,860 years, our solar system, it's just a scientific fact, returns to the same spot that it's at right now. We are revolving. We're moving very slowly as a solar system. Just like our planet revolves around the sun, our entire solar system also revolves around the central sun. That central sun is very, very powerful. We're just beginning to understand that radiations, electronic waves that are emanated by other heavenly bodies, planets, stars, etc., actually do affect our thoughts. They affect nature, and they have effect on a lot of things which we really don't understand yet. But the scientific understanding of the Pleiadians is that every 25,860 years, the solar system that we live in, all of our planets and our sun, move close in proximity to this central sun. The strongest point of radiation from that central sun is just as we enter it. That's when we get kind of a boost in energy. There's a surge of power, kind of like turning up the switch on your hair dryer from high to low, and there's a sudden surge of heat, and then after you use it for a second, you kind of get used to it. Well, it's something like that. So what they want to make us aware of, that this is a great time of potential. It's a time of change. It's a time of wonderful opportunity. Along with that, the downside is that there's going to be a lot of problems, too. Anytime we have change, we have fear and a lot of other problems. You don't have to be a genius to look at our planet right now and look at our planet as a whole and see all the people around it in China and Africa and the Polynesian Islands, Australia, Asia, everywhere, that everybody is growing up with different ideas, different concepts. We are a world in turmoil. We are being thrown together through communications and technology. Some places it's going well, some places it's not going very well. But unfortunately, most people, when things aren't going well, they turn to whatever they regard as their religious beliefs. They try to put faith in what they believe. And these ideas are not going to serve them in the coming years, because these old philosophies, old thinking, old religions don't really provide answers for the coming questions that we're going to have. Consequently, there's going to be a lot of emotional hardship for many people. Murder, suicide, crime, things like this are going to be tremendously on the rise. We are going through a time of change. On February 3rd, 1844, we began 184 years of change. This is when we start to move into the proximity of this new age position, this new cycle. And at that point, things start to accelerate. We've noticed just ourselves in the last few years the great acceleration of inventions and so forth. There is no other time in the development of our society when we will accelerate as fast as we have the last 100 years and will the next 20. Look where we came from covered wagons to going to the moon in such a short space of time, where for 2,000 years before that we hardly grew anything at all. Well, we had this 92-year period from 1844 up to 1937, which was the beginning, or the first half of this changeover period. The Pleiadians say the changeover period is 184 years long. It goes from 1844 up to, let's see, that would be what, 2028. So they're saying that the first half, the things start changing, inventions and everything greatly accelerate. Since 1937, on February 3rd, that's the second half of this changing period. This 92 years is dominated now by all the problems that come up because of this accelerated change. And boy, aren't we seeing them. There's going to be a lot of wars, a lot of other emotional problems. One thing they said we can count on seeing is there will be a tremendous rise in new religions and new ideas. So apparently, and we are seeing some of that, apparently as things get more difficult, people search for answers. They search for ways to solve, their problems. And when they do this, they come upon their own conclusions. They then form together, maybe in a small group, give themselves a name, and we have a new religious sect. Well, we can expect that to happen a lot more as times get more and more difficult. One other thing of note, they mentioned that because of this change and because of the increase in radiations, that those people born on February 3rd, 1937, as close as possible to 11:20 in the morning, have the greatest possibility of being the teachers, prophets, and geniuses of our time. See, that was the optimum time, apparently, for people to come in and be affected by the radiations just as they were at that moment. From that date forward for a year, through the whole year of 1937, beginning of February 3rd, like I said, it was the highest probability of these geniuses, prophets, and way preparers and teachers to be born. So we might look to people at that age. We're in 1992 as I'm speaking now, so those people would be, 55 years old. So we could look to, as you're looking around at people that are speaking, lecturing, and talking, you might keep an eye out for people who are roughly 55 years old right now, and let's see how many of them have really come forward. Because, of course, even though you may be a highly evolved spirit, and evolve means wisdom gained over a number of lifetimes, okay? So we may have a number of those people that were born, but they were born in poor environments, or for whatever reason they weren't able to really come through. So it's also interesting that that's when Billy was born, right at that moment, why they caused him to be born at that time. And they seem to have very high respect for Billy's evolution. Billy is not Pleiadian. He is not Lyrian. He's from an unusual little race called Lawsons. Apparently they live on only one planet, are very, very old, older than the Pleiadians themselves, and consequently are very good beings for becoming prophets because of the age of their evolution, they can withstand and understand things very well. Also, I think it has something to do with the brain matter itself being able to grow larger numbers of connectors, which can hold more acids and consequently more intelligence. So there seems to be something to that. That's probably why they altered Billy's thoughts when he was 7. There's probably a strong connection there someplace. So anyway, they wanted us to be aware that scientifically it's just a fact that our solar system is moving into this new period, that we're in new geography. We're getting closer to the central sun. The radiations from the sun have a really strong effect on our thinking and so forth here. Consequently, this new age period, which is here, is a very good time for potential. It's potentially a great time for us to grow. But this means those of us who move more towards a spiritual life, seeking out the answers of creation, learning to develop our world and our society around spiritual laws, have a much better chance now because of this location where we're at. We have a better chance of being heard, being understood, and developing ourselves. So it's important, if you feel the need to be somehow involved, to be inspiring, to be a role model for others. And I think inspiration is the word here for the next few years, that it's not a good time probably to go out with a gun, pick up a gun and shoot the bad guys. It's not a good time to go out and fight in direct opposition to the negative influences on the planet. Instead, it's a time to turn away from that and let the negative things spin out on their own, fight among themselves. It's a good time to do some woodshedding for yourself, to become a spiritual person yourself, to rise spiritually within yourself to your capabilities. Work on, development of self. And by that, you will become a role model and an inspiration to others. And most importantly, as you're doing this, as you're developing yourself spiritually, make sure there's integrity with it. Don't do it, and don't let your ego get involved. Catch yourself if you find yourself, becoming ego-minded, wanting to be popular, needing to be successful to write a book, or you want to do a television show. In other words, don't make things up. Because true spiritual development, part of that is the development of integrity to self. You will not be a good role model, nor a successful inspiration to others if what you're doing is not filled with integrity. I think integrity is probably the main thing that we look for in our leaders, in our role models, and sadly enough, it's one of the main things that's missing right now among our leaders that we normally see in today's world. Our presidents, our leaders, our generals and so forth, even though they think they're doing the right thing, that this world is terribly lacking in integrity. So keep that in mind when you're on your own path of spiritual growth here. Incidentally, the Pleiadians see a pretty good future for us. Even throughout all of the chaos and other things that are coming up, they see a rather positive future. As a matter of fact, there are a couple of ways of calculating the future. As you said, there's one way to calculate. There are two ways to see the future. You can use mechanical or spiritual means to see what's called a future vision. You can look ahead into the future, and that's fairly accurate. Or you can also use numerology and numeric systems and so forth, mathematics to predict future, and that's not nearly as accurate. They have looked ahead in future view and seen a rather pleasing future for us that we actually, based on events in 1975, they showed Billy a future where we had grown peacefully to a society. He was looking 500 years ahead, that we had spacecraft very similar to the Pleiadians. We had facilities on the moon and the outer planets, and we were doing fairly well, and our population was much lower. So there is, sounds like a pretty good possibility for growth in the future. So let's see what we can all do to be part of that. Okay, I see on the old little wheel here we're ending the side of or coming to the end of this side of the tape. So I'll see you on the next side. Okay, we're back here on side 2 over here, and this is actually the 4th side of the tape series on tape 2, so I hope you're still with us. I was just getting ready to discuss a little bit about some of the problems in Billy's group. Bear in mind that Billy's a farmer, and his friends are all farmers and live in small town areas, and suddenly to find themselves in the middle of contacts from highly evolved beings from another world, obviously they got a little excited. Some of the members were having a lot of difficulty believing what was going on. Much of the information that was coming from Semjase and the other Pleiadians was very disturbing to some of the members of the group. It was very hard for them to throw off years of upbringing and things that they had been taught and suddenly change their minds to another way of thinking. I think the most disturbance was probably caused by much of the information surrounding religion and Jesus and the Talmud and so forth. There was a lot of information brought to Billy about Jesus Christ, and all that, since there's so much of it, I put it on 2 special tapes that you can listen to in this series, and they're called the Talmud Emmanuel. And the information about Jesus came in many different parts of his experiences. He had some experiences about it when he was young, in his teens, and then on many contacts there would be little snippets of information, as well as the uncovering of the book, the Talmud Emmanuel, which was translated out of Aramaic into German. So I've put all that together on 2 tapes, so it's a little bit more coherent, so you can listen to it there. But some of the members in his group were having trouble with that, and it caused problems. Billy took a picture once of several members of the group with the ship floating overhead, and Semjase was very uncomfortable that a couple of these doubters and people who were having problems was in the picture, and so she actually destroyed the pictures with her mind. And she didn't want these pictures out, and she wanted Billy to kind of remove these people from the group before they caused any problems. So already we're having difficulties with Billy and the people around him. While Billy is a very nice, warm, intelligent person who is full of integrity, he's not your leadership type. The two don't seem to go hand in hand. And throughout the whole history of his contacts in the group, he's always had difficulties with, with members. But that's to be expected. There's so much pressure on these people from inside their own ranks, from the outside world, and from these extraterrestrials that obviously there'd be a lot of difficulties springing up. They're no different than just the rest of us. So overall, though, I think they've done a wonderful job of coping with all this stress and pressure from outside influences and trying to keep this information as honest as it is and to try to get it out to the world. So, okay. Semjase also mentioned to Billy that not to be too worried about his acceptance, because Billy was being led to go out and do speeches and talks in public, and he didn't want to do that. He says, I'm not good at that. I just don't know how to talk to people in public, and he really never has. And she told him not to be too concerned, that there were a lot of good people, she called them friends, around the planet that would hear about him and be drawn to the information that could be helpful in those ways. A couple of times people from Billy's group also went out and gave talks, and I understand Billy tried it once or twice, but he was not received very well. I think it was just too difficult for someone that had had all the unusual experiences that he had had, contacting people in other worlds, seeing other worlds, traveling in other times, actually visiting, moving in time and visiting prehistoric times, medieval times, visiting Emmanuel at the time just before his crucifixion. These were all amazing things. Billy, thinking, of course, everybody would be fascinated to hear about it, comes out in public to give a small talk, and people really think he's kind of insane or crazy. Billy spent some time when he was younger in a mental hospital. Because he was incorrigible, and they thought he was really difficult to handle, and he was having problems. So he was always kind of concerned that people were going to think he was totally nuts, and then he would wind back up in a facility someplace. So this always was concern to him when Semjase would press him to go out into the public arena. Early on, too, in the contacts, the Pleiadians were making it clear to Billy that the purpose of his education was to get information out to the general public, speaking, putting out books and so forth, and letting the world know about this, because they were very adamant about the main part of their reason for coming was to try to educate us about the universe, about life, who we are, things we would call philosophy or spirituality. And throughout all of the contacts, there's quite a bit of information about that. I have not interjected too much of that to this point, just a little of it, because it was kind of sporadic throughout the meetings whenever they would start talking about it. So again, like in the Talmud information, I've assembled that all in kind of one coherent straight through message and put it on the 2 tapes in your series called the Creation Tapes. Actually, one of them is called the Semjase Spirit Lessons, which is Semjase speaking on the philosophy of life based from a Pleiadian point of view. Then there's the tapes marked Creation, and those have more of, I guess you call them the spiritual laws on them or something like that. But that's where most all that information is. Instead of just putting in little pieces of it here and there, I tried to put it all together in one coherent statement. So you can listen to those just on their own. Before she leaves, Billy has a couple more questions that he has to ask. He's concerned once again about other people claiming to have contacts with other ITs and other life forms in other worlds. Excuse me. Semjase again tells him that there are no other life forms living in our solar system, and that no one on Earth is having any contacts with other Ts. As a matter of fact, she goes so far as to tell Billy that he is the only person on Earth having contacts with ETs. But in another part of the notes, they also suggest that about 3,000 ships a year come in, and occasionally ETs do have contacts with people, but maybe only for one time or so. So there seems to be some contradiction here, but I think what they're making reference to is the fact that Billy was the only one having ongoing contacts of his particular nature. And that's probably true. There doesn't seem to be any other cases on record so far of anyone having contacts the way that he has had. Billy is also at a point where he's getting kind of upset and frustrated because he's having a lot of problems at home, and he's trying to, do something about that. So she's trying to comfort him to keep going, and again she suggests that perhaps he could sell some crystals or something. And she hammers home again the fact that Billy is the first person in 2,000 years that has been able to be in contact with higher intelligence, that the Pleiadians for the past few weeks have been putting Billy in contact with a higher form of consciousness for his own spiritual growth, and also so he can put a book together on this particular subject. So even though things are getting kind of difficult for him, she's pushing him to hang in there and so forth and hang on. That if he gives up, this is the interesting part. She's saying, well, it's your decision if you want to go on. And Billy's saying, well, I've got to get a job or something because things are tough at home and I don't have any money. And she's saying things like, well, it's your decision, but of course if you have to get a job, then mankind will suffer. That if you have to get a job and we have to discontinue our contacts, then she's putting all this pressure on Billy that the development of Earth itself will suffer from this. And I know after, this is in 1975, and I know I didn't meet Billy till 86, I guess it was. And even then, in the summer of 87 and 88, when I was there, Billy had the same feeling that he had somehow let the Earth down, that he felt by the fact that the contacts had come to an end years earlier, that he somehow had failed the Earth. So there was all this pressure on him, even at this early time back in June of 75, that they were pressuring him to make him feel like the entire fate of the Earth was dependent upon his shoulders. And here's a poor little guy that's trying to do his best to understand all this information, write it down. He's got a wife at home and kids that need attention, need money, and need help, and he's not providing well as a father, and that makes him feel bad. So he's in a rather tough predicament here, and she's really not trying to help him out very much. She's suggesting that they would help as far as crystals and so forth, but she's leaning on him all the time and reminding him how valuable he is, how important he is, how evolved he is, how evolved he is. There's really a lot of psychological pressure on Billy at this time to deliver. Well, on another note, he asked her at one time about government on how they make decisions and so forth. And she mentioned that the Pleiadian worlds, of which, as I understand, there are 3, that the Pleiadians belong to an alliance of about 127 billion people on a variety of planets that all belong to a certain alliance. And they have come together and have agreed upon certain rules and laws governing their section of space and how they do things. And under these laws follows the rules on contacting lower species like ourselves and what they can do and what they can't do. So apparently they do have a large alliance. It's a collection of human and non-human races. And quite frequently throughout the context, she would always refer to the fact that she would have to get permission from her council. And her council refers to a group of people in the Pleiadian worlds who make the decisions for the Pleiadians based on information they get from this alliance. The head of the alliance apparently is a very highly advanced group in the Andromeda galaxy that offers information or advice to the alliance, and then these people take it back to their planet, discuss it among themselves, and then they decide what's good for their own race. That's kind of their form of government. Interestingly enough, they don't have voting like we do. Their world, everyone has to agree. Here, if we have a 51% majority, you can be president. But on their world, it takes a much larger percentage. They figure, and if all the people don't agree, then there could be some valid reasons for it, and they like for everyone to agree, so they work everything out until all are in accord. On his 25th contact, which was June 16, 1975, Semjase informs Billy that the group demonstration that she was intending to have has been called off. Now, Billy's group members have been asking him time and time again, can they see the ship? Can they meet Semjase? I mean, I would do the same. That was certainly one of my interests when I was going over there. I was hopeful that something like that might happen. And I can imagine the excitement back in 75 from the group members that were helping Billy when he was having contacts regularly, that they would certainly be excited about wanting to see the ships. So they were waiting in anticipation because Semjase had said a group demonstration would be forthcoming. Well, apparently she changed her mind. And she changed her mind, she said, because after examining the thoughts of some of the group members, she found them to be, in her words, were not mature enough and could not understand what was going on. She explained that they felt that certain members of the group were of such low evolution or such low understanding and mentality that they would not take the demonstration correctly, that they would misunderstand, that they were not spiritually developed enough to properly, absorb this, I guess. I guess they felt if they made themselves visible to these people, that this would kind of overload them, that no longer would there be room for doubt in their minds. Normally we go through life making, kind of rationalizations about things, and we say, Well, we don't have the real answer, so we make up our own answer about something. Like, we really don't know what God is yet on our world, so we just make up our own reasoning and our own logic, and we subscribe to whatever religious group kind of goes along with our thinking, and that's our acceptable standard. But if something were to come along, like if we had irrefutable proof that God was this or God was that, or there was no God at all, and it was irrefutable, well, there was evidence, where we would have to immediately drop our own logic, and we would have to change our whole view of the world based on this new information. They had no choice. That could be very disruptive to our mentality. And they find the general mentality of most people on earth in that state, a state of confusion, a state of ignorance, and they feel that sometimes facing certain people with irrefutable evidence about things is too much for them. They'll literally kind of overload and turn over in their minds, was the expression. So apparently they felt that certain members in Billy's group really weren't mature enough yet to be faced with irrefutable proof that ETs existed. So she decided to call the demonstration off. So Billy was very concerned. He was going to have to return back to the house and explain to these people that the demonstration had been called off. There may be a future demonstration, but it would only be in some smaller fashion and probably for him only or something. So he didn't have good news to return to the house with. Again, he reiterated to her that he was seriously considering stopping the contacts because of all the pressure at home and the money pressure and things on him. And again, he was told that he would have to decide, that there was a lot of pressure on him. So already in the contacts, we're only the 28th contact, and the 25th contact, and he's already feeling the pressure of this. Well, all in all, there turned out to be over 130 contacts before it finally ended. So already at the beginning stages of this, there's a lot of pressure on Billy. Billy had a question about talking to spirits, if mediums, seances, things like that were correct, if people could actually talk to the dead. So he asked Yasi about it. He said he had his own viewpoints, but he kind of wished to keep them to himself, which means he probably wasn't too sure himself and didn't want to embarrass himself. So she told him that, well, in 95% of the cases, know that it's fake, it's not true. That generally what mediums do, mediums, whether they're aware of it or not, many of them are very sensitive telepathically, and that they can pick up thoughts from the subconscious of their customers. These thoughts may be old memories and ideas and memories that they've had about a loved one. They can be picked out of the subconscious. The medium then senses them and will tell the customer that they're receiving a message from great Uncle Harry or something, and remind them of something that happened in the past. The customer, because they can't remember it, they've forgotten about it, because their conscious mind can't recall this, they think this is just a wonderment that this lady has actually done this, and surely it must be happening because how else could she know about these things? When actually what's really going on is that the medium is just sensitive telepathically and is pulling that information out of the customer's own subconscious. So it's something to be kind of careful about. She did remark that in some cases there are people who actually can contact the dead. She only knew of 4 people on the planet, she said, that were developed enough, understood it well enough, and actually could do it. None of those people were in Europe, so that would exclude Billy and any of his group members. None of the people were in Europe, and all 4 of the people that had the capability, she says, would never do it for the public, never for money. These were all people who were developed to a point where they were spiritually developed enough, where creationally they understood how to handle this information, and they would never really reveal it to others and do it. So this is suggesting, even though they're telling Billy that he's very evolved and the highest evolved person on the planet and all that he's very special, that he wasn't special enough actually to be one of these people. That there were obviously 4 other people on the planet that were spiritually probably more developed than he was and had these abilities and these understandings that Billy did not have. Okay, so there's some contradiction here that they're feeding Billy, where all along they're telling him he's the most advanced, very special, that he's the highest evolved person on the planet, and then they make these statements where there are apparently 4 other people on the planet more evolved than he that have the ability to contact the dead that Billy doesn't understand. So there are some areas of contradiction here where Billy is being led down a path, and by psychiatry standards, you could say he's almost being brainwashed in some instances without even being aware of it. She did, in summing that up, she did mention also that they don't even feel it's a good idea to talk to the dead, and reminded Billy that a dead spirit, once the spirit passes over into the fine matter world, it doesn't have any more knowledge and information than it did when it left. That once you pass over into the fine matter world, all that goes with you is the current wisdom. It's the wisdom of the experiences that you've just had. There is no creative thinking and no new experiences in the fine matter world. The point is, you don't know any more in the fine matter world than you did when you were here. Actually, even less, because you lose recall, apparently, of many experiences. Mostly, what goes with you is just the wisdom of those experiences. So someone over in the fine matter world couldn't answer your questions now any better than they could when they were here. Apparently, also, it's similar to something like a sleep state in the fine matter world, where it's kind of a cogitating thing, where you kind of cogitate, is the word that Billy used, that you're working out or kind of finishing out, things and experiences that you've had in the working out or kind of finishing out, things and experiences that you've had in the physical world. This would be very similar to like sleep at night, when the experiences of the day are still kind of working around in the machinery of your subconscious. So she remarked on this because she says, for the most part, spirits don't like being contacted. They don't like being bothered, and they really aren't even interested in sending any information back to the physical plane, and in most cases will lie, make things up, or just play a joke on the human because they don't want to be bothered. It seems to be an attitude they have once they're separated from the physical body. So the Pleiadians don't make any effort to contact the dead. They see nothing helpful about it. She did remark that it can be useful and helpful in some areas once the individual is spiritually developed enough where he can contact higher forms of life. But that's very rare because very few people know how to do it. But in that event, you could contact a higher form of life, a being of higher consciousness and higher knowledge, which, if that being was interested, could transmit knowledge back to you and educate you. The drawback seems to be that it's very difficult to do, and in most cases, a being of higher consciousness will have little interest in sending you any information, and that information that they send may be too much for you. There's something to this learning thing, that you should get information when you need it. If you are working on a particular problem in life and need to solve it, then information pertaining to that problem is useful at the time. If you receive information about something that you don't need, it's not useful. Or if the information is not of the right type, if it is too high information, if it is information that doesn't pertain to the learning steps that you need at the moment, it may only cause frustration, anger, or whatever, and it's not really of any use to you. So it's not a great answer either, just assume that you can contact higher forms of consciousness and that it's going to be a wonderful thing for you. So there are problems at contacting the spirit world. Semiosi then suggested that it might be a while before she gets back to Billy because they have a special mission going. They've apparently been doing some work on Mars and watching something's going on Mars in 1975 that they're very fascinated with, and she wouldn't tell Billy. It was very clear throughout the context that on many occasions, well actually quite often, they were very open to Billy that they would not tell him certain things, that they would eliminate information from him on purpose so he would only be hearing the things that he needed to hear for his mission. They would purposefully eliminate information about governments and so forth that he didn't need to know. One, they didn't want people to get the information out of him accidentally. And two, they felt it was a form of protection. If he didn't know something, then he wouldn't be considered, a threat to a government organization. They also informed him on quite a few occasions that they would only tell him part of the truth. It became obvious in some areas of information where they would only tell him half of the truth, and he wouldn't even know that. They would just tell him part of an explanation, and later on he would find out there's more to it, and he'd want to know why they didn't tell him the rest of it. And that came up a couple of times, and she just remarked that they had decided that there were, in each area of information, they would only tell him certain things, and they would only tell him enough information for what he needed to know at the time. So right here they're already dealing with him on a need-to-know sort of basis. When you sum this up with the way they talk to Billy and so forth, it's plain to see that they regard Billy almost like an experiment or a test case in some cases, where they're trying out to see what he can do, what he can understand, They then feed him information. Like at this time, at this point in the context, they were very adamant about him doing public speaking, about getting certain informations out. They were very adamant about him wanting to go out speaking about the ozone problem. And Billy kept kind of balking. He didn't want to do this. He did not want to go out speaking in the public. It's just doesn't suit his personality well. You'd think they'd catch on to that. After you meet Billy only for a little while, you can see right away he's not the public speaking type. Billy's your little guru type. He's the kind of guy you seek out in a quiet cave somewhere and have a beautiful, wonderful, loving conversation with. But he's not your public speaking type. If he was speaking in a crowd, you would probably need, for one, you need a translator, and you would probably need some visual aids or things to help him out. It's not his forte. Well, anyway, as I was mentioning, she told him that it was going to be a while before the next contact because events on Mars were going on and something new was happening. The Apollo-Soyuz hookup was getting ready to happen. The Russians and the Americans were planning a joint capsule venture or satellite venture in space. Billy was a little surprised because he had been told by the Pleiadians that was not going to happen until years later. So apparently their future view can be off too. They were surprised that events had moved forward so fast and they were getting ready to happen. And she commented that they were very, very concerned and wanted to be careful about this mission because they didn't want the Russians or the Americans to learn certain things. That they were concerned that on this mission that the Americans or the Russian team, the scientist team, may come about certain knowledges and cognitions which could be dangerous to mankind, they said. They were afraid that some of this information they may learn in space, if fallen into the wrong hands, could provide entirely too much power to either the Russians or the Americans. Apparently they say that both the Russians and the Americans were already working on so-called doomsday machines, technologies that were very advanced and could actually cause the destruction of the Earth itself, all in the name of peace, of course. She mentioned to Billy on several occasions on different Apollo missions and even on Earth under certain projects that they would interfere from time to time, causing these projects to go astray, causing the scientists to suddenly lose their memory, or certain things to happen so that the projects couldn't be finished in order to slow down the progress of scientists. This was generally always done in areas where it was military-oriented, where scientists were working on something for the military that would be harmful to the planet Earth. So they are affording us some measure of protection, and they are staying involved in certain areas. They are interfering, just plain interfering in our development in certain areas, which I hope is helpful. One other question before we stop this contact was Billy was concerned that other ETs were also coming here also, and what, these other ETs that come to Earth that the Pleiadians are telling them about, what kind of effect does this have on people? Because there are other people like George Adamski's and other people who are claiming to have contacts, and Billy says, how can you be so sure that they're not? Well, Semyosi told him that yes, there are other splinter groups of the Pleiadians, one in particular called Bafath, B-A-F-A-T-H, we're going to hear more about as we go through the contact notes. There are other groups that continuously do contact human beings from time to time. This one particular group, the Bafath, seems to be very well organized, and it is their MO, their modus operandum, to infiltrate religious leaders and political leaders and instill thoughts of grandeur and ego into their minds, causing them to do certain things. They particularly play on religious leaders, they say, because people who follow religions, that their minds are oriented to being a follower, to being a servant, to worship, to be on their knees to information and so forth. These people are easily controlled. And if through religious leaders they can implant thoughts into these people, then they can control their thoughts. Apparently, the Bafath, for years, a small group, much smaller than the whole Pleiadian nation, has been concerned and has been trying to control the planet Earth through force. They can't openly do this because their existence would be confronted, of course, by the Pleiadians and the others that protect the planet.
but the Befath seem to be doing their dirty work on the side. We'll learn later on that even back in the 50s, there was a large group of people, a list provided to Billy when he was a teenager of over 700 religious and political leaders around Earth that were being broadcast delusions during their sleep and so forth by the Befath. Our subconscious is very open and susceptible when we're sleeping, and it's possible for these beings and for the Pleiadians to literally push information, ideas, and thoughts and dreams into our thoughts, and we will have no idea where they come from. You'll think it's your own decision making. So this could be, of course, be very dangerous. And she told Billy that yes, it is happening, but they really can't do anything about it. For one, they don't know when it's happening. They can't detect it happening. They can't detect it. And they said, well, it's just unfortunate, but it does happen. They can't stop it because there's no way to really detect when it's going on, and would hope that the Earth human being would start following a more spiritual path and learn to develop his own personal spiritual strength and knowledges so he could defend himself against this sort of thing. This was one of the reasons why they kept coming back to this idea of religions, of worship, of being subservient and believing in gods and idols and so forth, that this makes us very susceptible to this sort of thing, and then we do not take responsibility for ourselves. People who generally tend to worship and are followers do not take responsibility for their own life. They're always blaming the problems of their life on other things. Like, well, gee, I can't get this job because, well, it's just the way God meant it, or it's just the way things ought to be, or whatever leader they're following, whatever the name of their religious belief may be, they would blame it on that, and they just chalk it up to, well, that was God's will, or that's the way I guess it's going to be. And that's not true. We are all 100% responsible for ourselves. We are all 100% responsible for our own actions and our own personal growth. This is probably the main, if there was any particular one statement that the Pleiadians are really trying to get across to us, it's that. It's get off your knees and take responsibility for yourself. This is your life. We go through a period, a succession of material lives in order to gather information to feed our spirit truth. That's the purpose of our life. That is the meaning for it. So in order to do that, you must learn to be clear thinking, clear and balanced when you gather this information. It is the purpose of our life to feed ourselves. You feed your stomach food, you feed your spirit truth. You feed it wisdom so it can carry forward and grow. That's the whole purpose of what life is all about. So if you are caught up in some sort of religious delusion or grandeur, what are you going to be feeding yourself? Delusion and, lies and deceit. So they look at us as a planet of spiritual stagnation, a planet of hundreds of different belief structures and ideas, idols and so forth, and they would like to see us, and they know that we must grow up. We know that they know we must start being responsible for ourselves, and they're very concerned that we're going to develop technology and speed off into space with our spiritual stagnation and all of our religions and our anger and hate and greed and power. And we're going to go speeding out there with that attitude, and we're going to run into some very dangerous adversaries who would take us out in a second. That could be, it could throw mankind back into, total slavery and primitive times again, if we were to do that. They are far more hopeful that the light workers, the leaders, the way preparers, the prophets, the more spiritually advanced people on our planet can make some breakthroughs. And by providing role model and inspiration to others, and inspiration again is the key here, that we can help other people on our planet develop more spiritually so this planet can be taken back. And we can get our planet back and live in a more spiritual, more creative, creational way, and get rid of the current structure of power and greed and mayhem. And then when we move out into space, we can align ourselves with them and other peaceful races and have much better hope for our entire civilization. So that kind of summarized up through the first 25 contacts through June of 1975. Okay, now we're up to June 25th. He had his 27th contact. Up to now, all the contacts had been situations where Semjase would telepathically get in touch with Billy and direct him to a certain location. And Billy would ride his little moped out and meet her, sometimes at night, but most of the time during the day. But it was getting a little bit more difficult because people were starting to follow Billy, and it was getting difficult for him. And he lived in a little town called Hinwell at that time, and word was getting out more and more about what he was doing, and a lot of the locals kind of frowned on it and thought he was kind of strange, and so things weren't real comfortable for him. But he was still going out and meeting Semjase on these contacts on the ground. He had not ridden in the ships yet. But things were to change, because on this particular contact, Semjase informed him, says, "Surprise, get ready, we're going to go for a trip." And she said, "Would you like to go for a ride in the ship?" And he said, "Of course, when?" And she said, "How about today?" So they did, and she said what she had planned was she was going to take him on a little ride in the ship up to Saturn, and they would go by Mars, and also go by Jupiter, and come back, which they did. And Billy didn't seem too surprised, which kind of was drawn to Semjase's attention. She was searching his thoughts and found that he was almost emotionless, that the idea of going for a flight to other worlds didn't seem to get him that excited. So I know it would certainly get me excited anyway. Well, anyway, she landed the ship and directed him mentally to where she was parked, and he went there. When he got there, they talked for a few minutes, and after explaining what they were going to do, they started walking towards the Beamship. And Billy says that there was no steps or anything involved, that somehow as they were getting close to the ship, they just floated right up into it, and the hatch just shut right behind them. And he doesn't have any idea really how that works. But when he got inside of the ship, he had his camera with him, and she told him he'd be able to take pictures. He could take pictures on the out the windows of the ship, and he could also take pictures inside the ship on these little sight screens they have. And it's television screens that allow them to see things, whatever they want to see. So Billy right away noticed that inside of the ship it was kind of green, the colorization in the air, and the windows were green. But from the outside, the windows appeared orange. So he asked her for an explanation of, why the windows, if they were glass, why were they different? She explained that on the outside of the glass, there was some sort of coating or something on the glass that detected the atmosphere. It would let them know if the atmosphere was harmful. And when they were down on the ground like this, where in the normal atmosphere, the windows would appear orange outside, and they would be green on the inside. And that was a sign that everything was okay, that the atmosphere was usable, they could get out. If for some reason they landed somewhere and there were different colors, reds, blues, or greens, whatever, that came through the window, if the windows changed that color, they'd know that there was a problem, and that they'd have to wear some sort of atmospheric suit before they could get out of the ship. Also, if the windows were a different color, it would not allow them to open the hatch and get out of the ship. They couldn't do that accidentally unless they had their atmospheric suit on. So there is some intelligence going on in the ship here. Later on, we're going to find out that the intelligence in the ships are primarily organic, that they're growing, what we think of as computers, that the ships are somewhat intelligent and can actually do some of their own thinking, which you have to figure for a race that evolved much, way beyond us. It's probably not such a big surprise. Well, anyway, once inside of the ship, they take off, and Billy notices as they get out of the atmosphere that the windows turn clear. And she said, yeah, when you're not in an atmosphere, they turn clear and you can see through them. Also, the windows block out radiations. So if you're looking out the window and it should be a comet or you go by a sun or something, that the radiations are blocked so there's no harmful effects from pressing your face up and looking out the window. That's probably what I'd be doing. I'd be right over at the window with my nose against the glass, looking out like, what's going on? Well, inside of the ship, too, they had several sight screens that they could watch on. Well, this was a rather short trip by their standards. It took 2 hours and 34 minutes, and they went, as it's expressed in the contact notes, they traveled 3,000 million kilometers, which would be equal to 3 billion kilometers that they went. And I don't know the exact route they took, but I know they went by Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars, and then returned. When they got back and sat down, Billy, for some reason, was just as emotionless, and she was a little surprised that he wasn't more excited than he was, but he assured her that, it had made quite an impact on him. He was just thinking about it. He was just considering about all the things that he had seen, but he didn't act excited. I know I'd probably be jumping around in the ship going, yeah, wow. Probably have a little trouble containing myself there, but there weren't any other remarks in the contact notes about these things. Except later on it does mention that around Mars they were careful that there was something going on Mars, and he was not able to take any pictures there. They wouldn't even get too close to the planet. They apparently got much closer to Jupiter and Saturn. He got some nice close-up shots on Saturn and on Jupiter also. So unfortunately, though, those pictures didn't come out. When he got his film back, they were all blank. He goofed up something on the camera, and that rather historic trip, there are no shots of it whatsoever. It was only a couple of days after that for his 28th contact, which was a telepathic contact. Up till this time, Billy's contacts had all been with Semjase, and she contacted him telepathically and said that her base commander, whose name is Quetzal, wanted to meet Billy and wanted to talk to him. Well, Billy had not met Quetzal or any of the other Pleiadians up to this time, so he was a little surprised, and he was actually a little taken back, and he says, well, what does the big chief want to talk to me about? Have I done something wrong? She said no, he just wanted to meet him, and that he had a few things he wanted to tell him. So she says, please pay attention, and he did, and telepathically then he started receiving, actually he says he could hear the voices right in his head, and he was listening to Quetzal. Quetzal was the base commander over all of the bases and Pleiadian action on the planet Earth. And I don't know how long he'd been at that particular position, but he said hello to Billy, was happy to meet him, and had some responses to a book written by a lady named Gloria Lee that a couple of people in Billy's group were reading at the time. And this book apparently was all about Gloria Lee claiming to have contacts with extraterrestrials. And he wanted to assure Billy that it was not true, that this lady Gloria Lee had not had any contacts with extraterrestrials, and it had not really taken place. So they chatted for a while and pushed thoughts back and forth, and that was his first introduction to one of the other Pleiadians. So it had been 28 contacts before this had happened, and this one was telepathic, by the way. On his next contact, Billy met Semjase, and they were talking, and this again was a ground contact. He had some questions, since now he was an interplanetary traveler. He had some questions about Venus, because in our past, quite a few UFO contactees have claimed to have been having contacts with Venus or knowing people from Venus, and Billy asked again if this was true, and she assured him that no, Venus historically, like she had mentioned before, had only come into its present orbit about 3,453 years ago. There was no life on Venus, and she remarked to him also that Venus originally, as I think I mentioned earlier, was a moon around Uranus, and 8,000 years back it had been knocked out of its orbit by the Large Destroyer comet. It had been pushed into two other orbits closer to Earth, and then finally, at 3,453 years back, it moved into the orbit that it was in now. So originally it was an ice-covered moon around Uranus. It had a lot of moisture on it, but was covered with ice. But when it passed close around the sun and moved into its final orbit, all that ice was greatly heated up, and it became like a cloud, a vapor of clouds all around the planet, and that's how we see it today. And for 3,000 years or so, it's been like that, where it's been very, very hot. So she gave Billy a few statistics about Venus that he could use to compare notes with other people in case someone said they knew something about Venus. She wanted him to know the vital statistics of the planet. So here's a few things that she told him. For one thing, when the planet Venus came into the orbit it was in, its rotation is much different than ours. It's very, very slow. It turns in the opposite direction that the Earth does. And a day on Venus is only is equal to 117 days on Earth. So every time we have a 24-hour day, I'd have to quickly add that up, 117 times 24. That's how many hours it takes for a day in Venus. There is no life at all on Venus of any form. There is some equipment there. They do have some equipment there, but very little because of the intense heat there. The surface temperature on Venus is 450 degrees Celsius, which is very hot. So that's just about the temperature it would take to melt lead. So, as a matter of fact, she remarked that one of the unusual features on Venus was that they had noted there that a Russian probe that had been sent there a few years before, she didn't say when, a Russian probe had landed on Venus, and when it hit, it looked, she says, just like somebody had taken something and splattered against a metal wall. It just looked like so much solder on the ground. It had melted and just splattered right against the surface. I remember when that happened, as a matter of fact, they were the Russian satellite was shooting towards Venus, and then they just suddenly lost contact with it. So apparently what has happened is it got close to Venus, and then as it moved in and started descending down to Venus, it got too hot and just melted and just splat right into the side of the planet. At sea level, the atmospheric pressure there is 334 times greater than Earth's. The atmosphere is 87% carbon dioxide, which would be very difficult for you and I to breathe. We couldn't. It'd be poisonous to us. Oxygen exists at levels of 4.23% in the air. Nitrogen and other rare gases count for 55.47%. There's very few water vapors on the planet at all. It's all in the clouds. The pressure of Venus's atmosphere is 107 times greater than Earth's. There is actually no water on the surface of the planet to support life. I suppose at that temperature that would make sense. So it's going to be some time before the planet actually cools down and the very beginnings of life could get started there. They have the magnetic field on the planet is very low. The Van Allen girdle is very weak, and the solar wind factor, she says, is not screened well at all. At least those things don't mean too much to me, but they might to someone that's more scientific minded. She says the surface of Venus is very flat around the equator, around the center part of the planet, and there's mountains up in the higher range. The temperature is about the same day or night. There are very great differences in the wind between the low flat areas and the high mountainous regions. In the high mountainous regions, there are very high winds reaching up to about 117 meters per second. Okay. The cloud level, the vapor level of clouds around the planet, about as low as those get, are 43.17 kilometers on the average, except, of course, when they have storms and so forth there. The average mountain height on Venus averages 2.3 kilometers. She says there is life on Venus, but it is nothing like human form or human shape. She didn't say exactly what it was. It might be some sort of biological life or something on there because there was moisture at one time. But she says for the most part, if you just look up at the moon at night and see it just crater-filled and barren and so forth, that's what Venus looks like. And then if you just cover it with clouds, then that's what you have. They have to be careful, she says, also sometimes there, because on certain areas of Venus, the temperature will rise suddenly greater than 500 degrees Celsius on the surface. The mixture of carbon dioxide, nitrogen, helium, argon, and neon gases fluctuate occasionally. The atmospheric pressure varies from 88 to 107. So that's pretty incredible there. So Venus is a planet that used to be a moon, has now become a planet, is in a stable orbit, but is in the very first development stages, so it's going to be quite some time before there could be any life there. Possibly in our own technology, once we get off our planet, then Venus is not that far away. That may, after Mars, which would probably be our first planet we'll inhabit, Venus could possibly be the second. At least it is a solid, hard planet, and it would be possible there if we could find some way to cool it down. So our technology may advance to that point sometime, and Venus, maybe somewhere in a couple thousand years, whatever, might be possible to control the environment there and habitate it. We might even be able to change its orbit and move it a little bit farther out or something so it was in a little bit cooler orbit than it is right now. Okay? So that gives us some vital statistics on Venus there that we might use to compare to other things. At the end of this contact, she told Billy some pretty good news. She said that they and the others had decided to take him with them, and they were going to be making a trip to the Pleiades and to another universe, a neighboring universe. And apparently there was a barrier between these universes, something built by the Timur race, which we'll hear more about later on, and they would be going through that. And Billy remarked, "Oh boy, we're going to go to the edge of the universe." And she said, "No, we do not search for the edge of the universe, because such does not exist." So apparently there's a barrier, a way to get between them, but there is no edge to our universe. Okay, I see we're coming to the end of this side of the tape, so you'll need to put in tape 3, and I'll see you there.